Good evening. 7, the pre-show. And you know what the pre-show is? A magical time. We do three things here. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time, we say very outrageous things. So welcome. If you're looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 7 minutes. All right, we've already got folks waiting to come in. They're knocking at the door. So I've sent the invites out a smidgen early. Let me get the embed code locked in here so we can get this on television. For those that don't know, we air the show on local TV here. So embed code is locked and loaded. Guests are invited, and we are ready to roll here. Got Bill and James on the line with us.
Yes,
how about that early invitation sent out tonight?
I know you made me look silly because I told our guests it wouldn't come out to the last minute.
well, they don't get it until
right.
The last minute. You get it, but
that's right. I'm not gonna wait till 6:59 to send it to them. And then they'll look down and say, "Oh, yeah."
Clicking refresh maniacally.
Yep.
A lot to cover tonight, James Adelon.
Yeah, you do. This is the day I'm writing Post-it notes to myself to not wear a blue tie or a red tie tomorrow.
Yeah, I got a nasty note from the news director. All of us did. Do not wear blue or red ties tomorrow, gentlemen. Ladies, do not wear blue or red. See, I don't even know what blue or I don't even know that. That's how I don't even pay attention to this stuff. I don't know if right wing is blue or red or left wing is blue or red. Don't know and don't care. But I will wear. I just might not wear a shirt at all. I might just go. I might go topless.
Do it. That's the tease right there.
Sam does weather topless.
Yeah, man. No, I guess I'll wear. I don't know. How about just pink? Does that work? Is that right wing or left wing?
It's probably safe. I know purple sometimes looks
purple.
Blue.
Can't wear green.
I mean, you can. Be kind of cool.
Weather maps could bleed through. Hello, Paul.
Good evening.
How are you, sir?
Doing just fine. How are you guys?
Great.
Good. We're excited. Got a busy show tonight.
All right.
So for Paul's box, it says Anne. I guess Paul is not Anne.
He's going to use his watch.
It's okay. No problem. You can call yourself whatever you want to on the show.
How about that?
He changed it so on the fly.
Wow. It would take me 2 hours to figure that out.
It's the joy of using a family computer, right? So.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. All right. So what have I not done here? I guess when it doesn't happen, I'll figure it out. So this is for November 7th, by the way, for those that are just watching the pre-show here, November 7th.
Is it true you're going to be announced as coach at Auburn tomorrow?
Yes. And I'm going to be calling the flea flicker on the first play of every game.
Well, I was thinking about halftime. They were probably going to let you be the guest coach next week, but Cadillac kind of pulled them together there in the second half.
Get our fleas flicked.
No, so I coach I'm the world's worst football coach. I mean, I am bad, but I coach
some 8A games, and I agreed with that.
Yeah, UAB spring game. So that and I'm a gambler. In baseball, I'm a wild man, and so in football, I said let's call the flea flicker. Let's go for it in the first play. These jabronis over there won't even have any idea this is going to happen. So your receiver is going to be wide open, 40 yards down the field. You've got to hit him, and it's hard for a quarterback to hit a guy that's wide open when there's nobody around him. I've learned that.
Yeah.
And so first play from scrimmage, let's go for it. So run to play. Some knucklehead on my team went and told the other team what we were doing. Somebody snitched on me, and they had it snuffed out. They had it snuffed out. I mean, to this day, I don't know who did that, but that did not make me happy.
Let's find out.
Did you go on a rampage in the locker room at halftime? And
yeah, I started throwing things and took Microsoft tablets and chunking them and all that. So, but no, I will never coach football on that level again. That was extremely embarrassing.
Did you get to wear the
Uh,
headset and stuff?
Oh yeah, man. But
you know,
the problem is I had to do, I had to play certain players to make I had more freedom than I thought I'd have, but I had to play certain players at certain times, which was fine. But it was fun. But just a reminder that I don't coach football.
So now I noticed a role that I'd never paid attention to, but like when Saban got crashed into Saturday night, there's a guy who appears his entire job, nothing else, is to take off the headset he has and give it to Coach Saban. Is that all that guy does the entire game?
Yeah, he's pretty famous. I forget the guy's name, but a lot of people
No,
talk about
you're talking
that
about you're talking about Cedric. Cedric.
Yeah.
Cedric's been there forever. And he was gone for a little bit, but he's back. I'm glad to see him, because he's been there through at least Stallings, I know.
Wow.
And, he goes all the way back, through all those eras. But this one guy, not Cedric, his entire job apparently was to rip off his headset and give it to Coach Saban. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I thought
hey,
that's
speaking
pretty cool
of Gene Stallings, I had great concern over his well-being after those tornadoes.
Right. Where is his ranch in relation to Paris?
It's north of Paris, right in the path of one of those tornadoes.
Oh,
and apparently the tornado missed his ranch by less than 5 miles.
He dared it.
I want to say that the town is
dared
called Powderly, Texas, which is
Powderly.
just north of
my goodness. They
Paris.
had that. That Powderly was in danger.
Real close.
So,
I was watching those storms really, really, really closely, and I began to discover, and then it became a thing, and we need to talk about it a little bit tonight. The radar hole that is there.
Oh, it's terrible.
Is terrible.
It's the same. It's the same kind we have in West Alabama and East Mississippi around Meridian and Demopolis. It's the same thing.
Southeast Missouri, Southeast Oklahoma, Southwest Alabama. Yeah, bad.
Rick, how much can you talk about the Durant radar?
I haven't gotten an update on it, but I don't know. You want to talk?
I got one last night. Can I bring it up, or will that call?
Sure.
No, it's not a secret. So yeah.
Why don't you put it in chat? Oh wait. NWS chat, that is. Well,
there you go. Yeah, no, stay away from that.
And let's welcome our television viewers. It is now the top of the hour. So we're going to start the show here. I think here comes Kim. I've actually got Coach Stallings' number, and I thought about calling him just to be sure he knew that you're not only in the Polygon, you got a nasty tornado coming up on you really quick. But anyway, apparently they're fine. I don't think they had any damage.
He would have gone out there with a rope, and he would have lassoed that tornado and taken it out.
Exactly. All right, so we are recording, and here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains, episode number 877. This is the weekly show that is all about the weather. This is for November 7th, 2022. November is a very interesting month. Let's looking at the maps this week. You see, it's going to be interesting. We're going to have blizzards, and we're going to have hurricanes, and we're going to have just all kind of stuff going on this week. So let's see. Jen, how are you doing? You're going to send us some cold air later this week, it looks like.
I'm going to go from 70 to 40 pretty quick. So big changes for me, and I'm doing good. I just got back this morning from Richmond, Virginia at the Mid-Atlantic Chaser Con. I just had a blast. Got a chance to hang with 5 of my Tornado Talk crew, and then just had a wonderful time. It was great for Tornado Talk to share what we do. And it was such a wonderful conference run by Chris White. And so this is their 5th, I think. It was 2018. I went to the first one. And so past couple of years, last year, I think they met in person. So that this year it was pretty full, probably 60 to 70 folks that were there. So it was awesome. So I'm a little pooped, and I met our friend Aubrey. We got to have our beer together. Her beer was bigger than my beer. But
show title. Show title. Yeah, there's no doubt.
Yeah, it was great to see her. She looked great. She was selling her signs, and I got one. You can see it up there. I got one of the tornado heartbeat signs that she made.
They make good Christmas presents.
That's right. It was great.
Yeah,
That's
friend of the
awesome.
podcast, Chris White, no less. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Yeah, I love seeing those pictures though. That was great. So
Yeah.
glad you're back in
And
service.
you met Dave Hoadley. Had you met him before?
I did. I met him at the first one, and he was very fascinated with Nelson was there, and he brought a lot of his photos. He buys photos off of eBay and collects them. And the oldest one he has, I think, is from 1898. And David kept coming circling back and looking through those photos. And Roy Britt, who worked with Thomas Grzoulis, was also there, and I'd met him before. And he was the videographer for the Tornado Video Classics, and is really good friends with Tom and Doris Grzoulis. And so it was awesome to hang out with him as well. So it was just a great group of people there, chasers and meteorologists, National Weather Service folk, and so it was really great.
Yeah, you know, it's still your job to get Mr. Grzoulis on the show, Jim.
Yeah,
You're still
I'm going to work
falling
on it.
down in your job.
I know. I'll do my best.
So we got James Adelot here from the Fox 23 Severe Weather Team in the studio tonight.
And Comedy Central.
Wow. I'm sorry,
live up
James.
to that. I know.
I'm so sorry. I mean,
he earned every bit of it. What are you talking about? He said that 1898 photo was Span's first promo pic.
Exactly, it was.
Oh,
I mean,
man.
and the truth is the truth. I mean, it was a great shot too. So, James, how'd you do with your tornado action out there late last week? It was pretty busy for a while.
It was busy enough to be here, but all just outside my DMA, my viewing area. So we were watching very closely everything that was going on, and happily active on social media for it. And it could have been a whole lot worse when you look at the length of some of those rotation tracks on the MRMS data. There were very active supercells. Could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, so let's go down to our Texas correspondent, Troy Kimmel. Troy, how close were you to those naders last week?
Sort of like Harry James is what we call that, James. That it was sort of off on the edge. It never was in the Austin, San Antonio CWA. We anticipated it might be northeast of Austin. Indeed, it was. But I think I had to work an event, a concert actually at UT, outside concert on Friday night at UT. And the biggest thing we saw, we had to delay about an hour and a half, but biggest thing we saw was pea-sized hail, and that was about it.
You can live with that. It seems like most of those really bad tornadoes were kind of in that, no man's land.
Well, they're Tyler, Longview, Texarkana, Paris, McAllister, James, back up your way. And as we sat in the EOC last Friday night as the weather event, we were working the concert at the university watching the Weather Channel, and they were on nonstop coverage. And it was really amazing to watch it. I mean, even the police officers that usually don't slow down for that sort of thing were watching these videos that were coming in. And they really were amazing.
Yeah. So let's go up to our Oklahoma correspondents. We got Rick Smith with the National Weather Service in Norman. So all of that was southeast of you, I guess, Rick.
I'm going to keep the same theme going. It was kind of on the edge of our area too, thank goodness. It only affected like 3 of our counties. It felt like much more. It was a long afternoon, and certainly the potential was there for really, really bad things to happen. We had 1 tornado in our county warning area, probably a QLCS hybrid kind of thing embedded in some larger area of strong winds down there southwest of Durant. I don't know if people are familiar with Durant, Oklahoma, but there is a giant casino there that draws a lot of people up Highway 75 there from North Texas. And that is an exploding area as far as population goes, and infrastructure and glass tower hotels at the casino and things like that. So obviously we worry about everybody, but things were dangerously close to Durant there. Durant's a very vulnerable spot, and but came out pretty well. We had that 1 tornado, and thankfully, I'm so thankful it didn't turn out any worse than it did. I thought for sure I'd wake up Saturday morning and hear of, a dozen fatalities or something, but I think it's 2. It's too many, but it was a big event.
Well, Rick, my concern all the way along, and I can ask Kim this because I know she'd have to agree with me. The thing that worried me about that enhanced, and then that moderate risk that came out is for it to be on a Friday evening. It just seems like people disconnect at the end of the week, and I was a little worried, but I'm just glad, like you said, Rick, that we had no more deaths or injuries than what we had.
Yeah, I mean, for whatever reason, it sounds like people were either plugged in somehow, or these were fast moving storms. They were moving 50, 60. I think there was one warning that had a movement over 70 miles an hour, which is just crazy. So even the people that were getting the warnings, you know, if they went outside and looked and there was nothing there, a minute later, the tornado could be on them. So it was just a lot of factors that were making, as we often see during these early, you know, these fall, early winter time events, the storm motion, there's a lot of factors there that could have made this really, really a lot worse.
Well, you know, one thing too, and then I'll shut up, and I know y'all find that hard to believe. But bottom line, what a great job SPC did, and the local WFOs. SPC had this thing identified 8 days out.
Yeah,
I mean, they showed it
last week.
Yeah, I mean, it just to me was amazing, and then the work from all the WFO standpoints, all the WFOs on the ball, and really did a great job.
Yeah, SPC nailed it, and yeah, we were proud of all the offices, and you know, we were kind of nervous because we knew we weren't going to get the brunt of it, but we're the primary backup office for Tulsa. We're the secondary backup office for Fort Worth. Shreveport is the primary backup office for Fort Worth. So we had already contacted our tertiary backup Lubbock to say we may need to back up Tulsa and or Fort Worth. You know, there was a lot of planning, but everybody did a really good job, and kudos to everybody out there that was doing those surveys for days and days. They're still going on, and yeah, it's just this is what we're here to do, and thankfully for whatever reason, people got warnings or were in the right spots where they needed to be.
I'm noticing on the chat, Kim, there's some talk about the circumstances surrounding the fatalities, and apparently there were 3. Kim, what do you know about the fatalities we had?
I saw Jen just bring down her mic. We just were discussing that one more had come in. Jen, were you going to talk to us about the circumstances of that?
Yeah, Nelson's typing right now, but he'll let me know. But he just mentioned to me that there were now 3 fatalities. So I'll give you an update on that in just a minute. But I don't know, James A., you said that one of the fatalities was in McCurtain County.
Yeah, it was not the Ida Bell tornado. It was one in the northwestern. It was the same long track supercell that went up across Choctaw County. But I believe was a mobile home fatality. A 90-year-old man was killed in McCurtain County. And I think that's the second McCurtain County tornado fatality this year.
I think there was one in Red River County with the Ida Bell tornado, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know about the other one. We had heard rumors that evening that there had been multiple fatalities there in Lamar County, northwest of Paris. Thank goodness that didn't pan out. But yeah, I didn't know there were 3 now.
Yeah, he just wrote, he said one was in Ida Bell, Oklahoma, one in Kaysen, Texas, and one in Pickens. And he thinks that all were in manufactured homes. So
I could hear Kim face palming when a local station went up to this gentleman and said, the tornado saved our lives. And I thought, well, that's going to be interesting. I don't know if anybody else saw this, but in the local coverage, they went and interviewed this man. His wife said, we've been watching the weather. We heard the tornado warning. He said, we were deciding whether to go to dinner or not. So I went and looked out the front door, and he said, looks fine. Let's go to dinner. And so they go and get in their truck, and then the tornado destroys the mobile home, and the truck is left with a tree on it. And, he gets out and says, well, the tornado saved our lives. And I thought, oh, my Lord.
That was on the Weather Channel. That was Mike Seidel on the Weather Channel.
Was it? Okay. So I could just
Boy, what do you say to that?
There.
Well, thank you for your input. Now to somebody else.
But
Wow.
they just kept covering it every once in a while they go back to that, and that was their big deal. The tornado saved his life, so it's like,
people put this stuff together in different ways. Everyone brings different context to the experiences that they go through, and sometimes it's not what you expect to hear. So yeah, you never know what you're going to get, especially in a live interview. But yeah, the circumstances around the fatalities and then the people who didn't perish, it's going to be really interesting to learn more. We actually have family in Idabel. My husband's uncle lives there. He's a priest at the local church. So we've been getting a lot of detail from him. He's been following the damage assessment process through the day. He's been very interested. He was very close to the tornado, and he's been working with his parishioners all day in recovery. And I think there's a lot of features to this event that make it really, really interesting from a communication perspective. It's this area you were talking about being this sort of dead zone, right? It's a place where they find themselves in between many different TV markets. So it's, sort of this DMA border. It's a big CWA border. There are 4 weather service forecast offices that all meet in this area. It's the edge of 4 of them. And, so it's this radar coverage gap. So while we were watching these things go into Idabel, you're watching from the Shreveport radar. It was where I was getting my best information, but you're scanning really high. It was really helpful to have the storm chase footage of tornadoes in Texas making their way up toward the Red River to give you that certainty that was actually on the ground going across the state border. So it'll be really interesting to see then what people in that area were able to understand of what was going on, where they were getting information from. It was interesting that the Weather Channel was going wall to wall. National outlets don't always focus on areas like that, but that was really the place to be focusing that day. So I'm going to be talking more with him, and through him, we might be able to get a bigger set of the population too, because in that area, there's a Tyson plant. And so there is apparently a very large Vietnamese population down there that raises the chickens. And then another set of immigrant population that's predominantly Spanish speaking that works at the Tyson processing facility. So there was all kinds of ways that this could have gone very poorly. And it's going to be very interesting to me to understand more about those populations. How did they receive information, and what was their process like? So a lot to unpack from this event for sure.
Yeah, I would love to know how people got the warning and how the TV stations handled this on the fringe of the market. For Dallas-Fort Worth, it's the far eastern fringe. And, for I guess Sherman Denison, Troy, was kind of heavily involved in that market, which a lot of folks don't know it's a market, but it's a market which is north of Dallas, between Dallas and Oklahoma City, and then Shreveport. And, how did they get the warning? The radar coverage was crappy with that, the high beam. And it was that's a challenging area to work right there.
Another thing too, James, you'll remember this, and Rick will know about this, and Kim, just because of the part of the country that we live in. But, this was a big thing for Friday night Texas football, high school football. And what was amazing is how many games at this time last week, Tuesday, Wednesday, were moved back to Thursday night. A lot of the school districts moved the high school football games back. And I even got screamed at about, they said, your severe weather forecast for Austin didn't work out. And we had to well, he didn't mention we had lightning popping everything in sight with, non-severe thunderstorms locally and that sort of thing. But boy, you don't, that's another thing too, Texas and Friday night football, you can't fool with that.
Another thing to mention about that night, right now, is peak leafing in Southeast Oklahoma. And down there, especially during the pandemic, there was this resort area that grew to incredible popularity during the pandemic. It was a place to go in Oklahoma for respite. If you were in North Texas, the Dallas metro, people would come up to Beavers Bend State Park and Hookatown. And it's just cabins everywhere. There's no real sheltering. I've stayed down there several times and had friends who were down there for the weekend. that is my husband and I, we considered going down there this weekend, this past weekend. We could have had a cabin rental in the very area where all the tornado warnings were happening and the tornadoes went through. So I was really anxious to see how all these people who were not even from the area, not knowing what county they're in, very questionably knowing anything about what was going on. And one of the things that's particularly scary about that area is if you'd wanted to leave, if people had wanted to get out ahead of the storms, there's one road in or out of the big tourist area in Hockatown. And, that spells very bad things for anybody. It's in the hills and the trees. And anyway, a lot of things apparently either went right or a lot of people got very lucky. And it's probably a combination of both, but I'm probably going to be going down there to learn a little bit more. I think there are a lot of interesting stories to learn.
My weekend met and friend of the podcast, Michaela Smith, was down there. So we were in bad cell phone coverage, but SMS text got through. And so we were able to keep her updated on everything. And you want to drive a meteorologist crazy, have a phone full of apps to look at radar and not be able to get data. Woo!
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes phones become bricks during these events. But Bill Murray, let's bring in our guest here because we can talk about this event all night long, but we got business to take care of. So go.
Yeah, I promised our first guest we were going to get him in and out real quick tonight, but the best laid plans of mice and men. It's a two-part show tonight. The first is loosely based on the Rankin Bass Christmas special from 1974, Year Without a Santa Claus. Do you remember that one, Troy Kimmel?
I do, sort of.
And
yes, I do.
Who are the two antagonists, Troy, of Year Without Santa Claus?
We're gonna have to go to James on that. James Spann.
I have no earthly
he was
idea.
Too cool in 1974 to be like.
It was.
Is that the Heat Miser one?
Yeah, the Heat Miser and the Snow Miser.
Yeah,
that's exactly right, James. Of course, they're stepbrothers and they control the weather, and they need to conspire together to do a favor for Mrs. Claus on Christmas Eve, but they have to get their Mother Nature involved. So tonight we're going to have a little bit of that. We got a special guest on to talk briefly about a timely topic. John Bangoff is a meteorologist at the Central Pennsylvania Weather Forecast Office in Pennsylvania, obviously, in State College. John, we've been remiss in not having you on before, but we're glad you're with us tonight. Kind of on short notice, you only have a couple of minutes because I know you got some daddy duty. Tell us about your family and a little bit of what's going on in your world.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I've enjoyed WeatherBrains over the last many years and become acquainted with a few of you. Man, it's been over 10 years since I graduated high school and got into meteorology now, which is sort of crazy. But my wife and I welcomed our daughter, Aurora Jane, about 7 weeks ago tomorrow, which is really, really fun. She's growing really well. I've sort of joked, my one-liner has been, Jane was our first choice for the last name. Borealis was the second choice. And my wife said, hey, you need to work on that delivery because a lot of people aren't laughing at the joke. It's definitely not the case that we're going to name her Aurora Borealis, but kind of fun. And man, it's been a blast. I might look a little tired. Definitely the case. I've been working rotating shift work now at the Weather Service for 4.5 years. And I was like, that should definitely prepare me. I'll be all right. Kind of, but 7 days of midnight shifts is much more sustainable than going on 7 weeks. I'm back at work now, but super thankful for a very generous leave benefit. I'll be off Thanksgiving through New Year's, and man, it's been awesome to just have so much time with Danielle and our new baby girl as well.
That's awesome. One thing that's not tired is your hair. It's looking especially well tonight.
Thank you,
Bill. Why do you always bring that up? I just wonder.
Because
I agree with Bill. This is a well-coiffed man right here. It's fascinating.
I'm very, very envious. That's for sure.
Tom Brady wants his hair back.
Playing the role of the Heat Miser tonight is the Science and Operations Officer at the NOAA National Weather Service Office in Phoenix. Paul's been with the Weather Service since 2002. Paul in Yegas, how close did I get to nailing that name? Am I even in the ballpark?
No, but no one seems to get it right. So don't worry.
Don't
worry about it.
I tried so hard. So sorry about that. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for putting up with all of our silliness. This is like our weekly therapy session. And hold on just a few more minutes, Paul. We want to really get into what all you're talking about. John,
I wouldn't mind if you say quick too. I mean, it was interesting listening to you guys talk about the tornado. I had 2 students in the office with me here in Phoenix Friday evening, and we were doing just kind of some dissecting and using GR2 to look at the radar data, and we're actually seeing debris balls and stuff happening in real time. So even though there's a lot of destruction and unfortunate stuff going on there, and we were able to learn from it many miles away. So it's very interesting and useful.
Yeah, it's so nice to be able to have data like we have right now, and to be able to be a front row spectator, and you can learn so much. I learned firsthand about this radar hole before it even, because I was constantly shifting between Fort Smith and Shreveport radars to, try to keep up with things. But we're really excited to have you with us here tonight, Paul. We're going to talk about some heat in a second. But John, I had a trivia question I'm going to throw out there, and maybe Span will get it. I don't know. We'll see. But we talked about your being a Braves fan at an early age, John, and coming up through the 90s when we were spoiled. I go back to 74, same year as the Heat Miser. James Spann and the rest of the crew, that Braves outfield had a Hall of Famer, a World Series champion manager and future Hall of Famer, and a batting title winner. Can you name any 2 of the 3 outfielders?
What year?
74. 3rd place Atlanta Braves team, the year Aaron hit the home run.
I have no idea.
Anybody? Nobody. No takers.
Dale
Henry
Murphy.
Aaron. Aaron was the left fielder. Dusty Baker, who finally won a World Series, was the center fielder. And a guy named Ralph Garr was the right fielder. And I remembered that without even having to look it up. I was so proud of myself. So anyway, that's in the worthless department. But John, back on March 28th, there was an 80 vehicle pileup in your area. That is one of the most shocking videos I've ever seen. It's something that's really hard for me to watch. I remember seeing it in fairly real time that right after the event. And I just literally had to turn it off because it looked like a scene out of hell. With just cars plowing into other cars, trucks plowing in at, full speed. And, the conditions that cause that are not that uncommon. So talk about snow squalls and the battle that is for you and your office and other offices like that.
Yeah, the snow squall issue is not uncommon to parts of the Northeast or to downwind of the Great Lakes, but it certainly seems to be a hot spot with a combination of terrain and commercial truck traffic and just personal vehicles moving through there. And seemingly every couple of years there's a major pileup. And the big thing with snow squalls is it's not a lot of snow, but it's a short burst of snow. And the big thing is this flash freeze component where you can be going along and it's sort of analogous to a summertime thunderstorm. Plenty of sunshine, people are just plugging along. Road temperatures can even be as high as like 55 degrees. And as long as the air temperature is below freezing, it snows hard enough, you can get this flash freeze component. And what tends to happen, as happened on March 28th, is all of a sudden people are trying to stop and they can't. They're plugging along and visibility is reduced to a quarter mile or less. And unfortunately, we tend to see these very frequent situations where you get these pileups where inevitably people die. Unfortunately, and one of the things that we saw on March 28th was that people's gut reaction when they get into an accident, as is sort of what you're trained on, is, oh, I need to stay with my vehicle. I need to get out of the vehicle and stand next to it. Right. And so you see these horrifying videos of tractor trailers plugging along at 30, 40, maybe 50 miles an hour. And unbeknownst to them, they're slamming into, other vehicles that are carrying hazardous materials, pedestrian vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things we've worked on at our office is a Snow Squall Awareness Week campaign. That's sort of what I'm on tonight. That's happening next week. And our office has really prided ourselves on being sort of the leader and pushing ahead, not only the snow squall warning, which was made available back in 2018, but now what we think is a really important piece of educating the public to understand what to do. Ideally, get the heck off the road is the best possible thing you can do. But that's something I've become really, really passionate about, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on tonight to just discuss this maybe underappreciated or under feared weather phenomena, I would say.
Well, I experienced that situation in 1991. And being from the South, I hate driving in snow. But, you know, I was in Pittsburgh for a conference. We were in a hotel in Monroeville, and we were driving, of course, to Hooters for 50-cent beer night.
Yeah.
You know, we were heading over to Hooters. Well, we were heading back, and we hit the snow squall. And of course, I'm always the designated driver since I'm the non-drinker in the crowd for the most part. And, you know, you can, if you want to shut a bunch of drunks up real quick, just yell over your shoulder, do y'all have your seatbelts on? You know, when you're tooling down the highway into the snow squall, and all you hear is click, click, click. But fortunately, we didn't become a statistic. Talk about the warning process, John, the watch warning advisory products that are out there, and how important they are, and, you know, how else you're getting the word out.
Yeah, so for the last 20 or so years, one of my coworkers, Greg DeVore, has been one of the leaders in trying to get a short fuse product to be able to convey urgent information, because a winter weather advisory is just not going to do it. Winter storm watch not going to do it. So currently, the methodology is we have the snow squall parameter, and that's given us at least some lead time to say, hey, there's a chance for these, whether it's cellular or maybe it's an Arctic front coming through. And so we'll generally be putting out, you know, DSS or decision support briefings to our partners. At the morning of, we'll put out a broad SPS, kind of like if you're expecting maybe black ice or dense fog, hey, heads up, snow squall is possible today. That'll go on the digital message signs with PennDOT and the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission. And then we will be monitoring very closely and either put out a special weather statement or a snow squall warning. Now, up until this year, snow squall warnings have always triggered the wireless emergency alert, which is beneficial, but it's also a little bit complicated, because if you're not in your car, it doesn't really affect you. If it's the middle of the night, you don't want to be awakened. So there's some complexity with that, but it does give us the ability to trigger an alert to people in a similar way that, say, a tornado warning would trigger your phone, or sort of similar polygonology as a severe thunderstorm warning. And we can get the word out about that potential hazard that exists with this. Now, this year, there's going to be now impact-based warning tags, where there's baseline tags that's no longer going to signal the wireless emergency alert, which does give us a little more autonomy to be able to, you know, communicate that at any hour of the day. And then we're also going to have that considerable tag, which will trigger the wireless emergency alert. I think we're continuing to learn a lot about this, how to communicate it, how to get the word out. It's difficult when people are driving 70 miles an hour down the highway to have to look at their phone and understand what's happening with the snow squall warning. As we've alluded to with a lot of the tornadoes, a lot of people are out of state. And so there's a ton of social science complexities that I think we're just beginning to understand. But each year we're learning more and more about sort of the watch process, which doesn't really exist, the warning and the advisory process as well. And we'll continue to improve on this. But man, it's a complicated issue with a lot of different facets related to technology and social science and people's decision points and things like that.
John, tell this Texan a little bit about the geographical size of these. Is there anything that is sort of what you keep an eye? How big are these things? I mean, is this sort of like lake effect snows that we hear about, which could be in very narrow bands and produce a lot of inclement weather in a very small area with the sun out 10 miles that way? Is that about what this is in some cases, or does it just depend?
Yeah, so there's sort of a variety of modes. Probably the most common and the most hazardous is going to be sort of a squall line type that comes along an Arctic front. You get a really cold air mass behind the thing. It's pretty windy. Those are fairly straightforward to warn on. We generally reserve snow squall warnings for major interstates. But there's more complicated situations, sort of like a pop-up thunderstorm type day in the summer, where you just got convection all over the place, and it's sort of like whack-a-mole, as I call it. In terms of size, the way that we've done snow squall warnings previously, since they've been wireless emergency alerts, is very targeted. We only want to warn pretty much the area that's in effect, with maybe a little bit of a buffer for people that are thinking about hopping on the roadway. I think you may see some warning philosophy change now, where a snow squall warning on cellular convection days could be a little bit broader, to just say, hey, there are a bunch of snow squalls around, just be mindful that these things exist, and then targeted for those considerable tags. But yeah, I would say if you're looking at radar on a snow squall warning day, it would look sort of similar to what it would look like on a pop-up thunderstorm convection day in the summer, with probably a slight preference towards major highways, because that's really where your biggest risk exists, where you have the best combination or juxtaposition of people moving at fast speeds in their vehicles and a bunch of commercial truck traffic as well, which poses a significant threat.
John, I just want to tell you, we've had the opportunity to know each other since your college days, I think, basically going back. So proud of what you've done. Congratulations, and you and your family. And just had to say that. I've had a chance to know John quite a few years. So
thanks,
good.
Troy. Appreciate you a lot, man.
Yeah.
John, I've got a question for you. Do you partner with state agencies to send those alerts if they're not WEA alerts now? Can they geofence around a highway with a certain buffer on each side?
So we have partnered very closely with PennDOT, the Department of Transportation, Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, State Police, and Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. And through that, it's sort of coordinated messaging. The major capability we have with our transportation partners is to basically put up messages on those digital message boards. And that is the capability we have. In addition to that, there is an app, 511PA, that gets used, and we're sort of experimenting with the capability to push out information to drivers. There's not necessarily unique ability for any of those partner agencies to like push out an alert to people's phones through something other than WEA. But honestly, guys, I really think the future of this is partnering with private sector companies like Waze, Google Maps, to be able to have polygons and alerts pop up on people's screens in their cars. We're getting so much fancier. It's going to take time, obviously, to phase that out and get rid of the old technology and get the new technology in. But to me, that's going to be the best way, because of what you referenced, the geofencing. A lot of people's cell phones, the technology is not great to be able to get targeted information. And so you end up with an overwarning problem, and people get, annoyed and turn off their WEA in a given event. But I think the continued partnership with our state partners is going to be critical, ideally using their connections as well with Waze and Google Maps to be able to get that information to people's phones in a better way.
I think James A. Mentioned in there that y'all have fancier cars than he does.
2009 Ford Explorer here, so everyone be quiet. Let's move on.
Crack me up. Then Dr. McClain, Dr. McClain.
Yeah, it is amazing how smart cars are getting. And I agree with you. I think that's a good point. That's the future, where we can really target our communication system to the people who really need the information, instead of just this wide net that we're casting now through all these other methods. It's cars. We've had, maybe similar conversation for road weather in flooding. It's the same warning problem. If you're not out on the roads, for a lot of people, those can be just as irritating, burdensome. Like I'm not near a creek, or, there are only a very small set of the flash floods that really can affect most houses. It's a very interesting communication challenge, and I appreciate your thinking there. Do you know of any efforts that are going on to try to integrate these warning systems with auto manufacturers?
Yeah, great question, Kim. I think there have been some ongoing discussions with PennDOT, and I'm forgetting the name of the company, but there's a private vendor that PennDOT works with that supplies a lot of the technology for some commercial truck traffic. And I believe that there are some efforts going on to bridge that gap. And we at the Weather Service might even have an opportunity to speak to that group of people just on some of the concerns with snow squalls. I should have checked that before I came. I don't remember, but I know that we're sort of moving into that sort of foray. And one of my goals for 2023, as we go into the third year of this Awareness Week campaign, is to try to make those inroads to better, reach the people that really need to be reached. Another thought I've had, and this is probably a down the road thing, but would there be a way that the WEA could only go out to, cell phones or devices that are moving at like more than 10 miles an hour, something like that, right? Like, I don't know if that's a possibility, but if you can filter out the stationary objects and, put it relatively low, like most people can't run more than 10 miles an hour, right? Like maybe set at 15, 20, whatever it might be. Something like that could be really nifty. So not a ton of tangible information to share, but I do want to pursue that in the midst of, doing what I can as a federal government employee to lean on some other folks to be able to connect with our private sector vendors as well.
That's
James,
really
you
cool.
had a comment. Kim, do you want to say anything else real quick? And then I want Paul to say, James, are you gonna take credit for what you were gonna say?
No, I'm channeling Bill Murray's great pun idea there.
Oh my goodness, that one was so good it went right past me. That one's in the goal before I even got the bit down. Oh my goodness. There's some really concrete ideas here. That's pretty funny. Anyway, now Paul, you made an analogy, because here's our transition from the snow miser to the heat miser. You made an analogy to similar phenomena in your office.
Yeah, just listening to John talk about this challenge of getting the message out for people that are traveling on the highways. We deal with that situation, but with dust. So we have people probably seen the big dust storms, the haboobs. That we don't use that term because if you are driving, if you're driving from Florida to California to go to like Disneyland, right, and you're passing through Arizona, all of a sudden you get like a haboob warning. It's like you probably what the hell is that? So
No, I'm not going there. Nope.
So we use dust storm. It's a little bit more, descriptive, but I believe the dust storm warning came out at the same time that the squall warnings went into effect as well. So it's been, I believe it's 2018 or so that the dust storm warnings went into effect. So we have the same thing, is that we can issue the big dust storms.
Sorry.
And they can cause problems, but there's the similar challenge of everything else that you guys are talking about too, like people getting the message that the message isn't necessarily intended for. So if I'm sitting in my house and there's some dust storm rolling through, it's really not going to be any consequence to me. So it's really challenging to just get that information to the folks, because the dust storm warning does do the WEA activation as well. So, we have to be kind of cautious with that, especially as these roll into the Phoenix area. You don't want to necessarily be setting off cell phones for 4 million people for no reason.
Yeah, Paul, interesting little sidebar on that. When we were first issuing these snow squall warnings, it had the capability to auto tweet. The Weather Service has that auto tweet function at one of our neighboring offices. Apparently, some wires got crossed and the VTech wasn't quite coincided with it, and it went out as a dust storm warning to social media. So that was rather interesting. A dust storm warning for somewhere in Pennsylvania was rather intriguing.
Yeah. Well, I know there were some issues with like some of the telco on the cell phone side too, because some of our dust storm warnings ended up triggering cell phones in like the Bay Area in California. And it's like, so I think those issues are hopefully behind us. I haven't heard any problems lately.
Yeah, I just thought that was a nice way to kind of combine our two things. It all comes together, even if through an error.
Hey, John, I've got a question for you real quick. How do you, and I know we're going back to the dry stuff that Paul's going to talk about, but how would you, I'm just asking how we would verify the snow squall warning. I assume that would be something that with a new product that you would have to do, right?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about that. In theory, if the snow squall warning has done its job, we should have 0% verification, right? Because there's not going to be any access, things like that. But the way that we're looking at, there's a lot of these road weather information sensors that departments of transportation have that give us real-time data on really the visibility, the road surface temperatures, and the flash freeze component is the critical piece, right? Where the road temperatures start out above freezing and then they plummet to below freezing and you get a sheet of ice. And so that's probably the best thing that we can do. But we just actually had a training last week for issuing local storm reports for these snow squalls. We're going to go in, and if we hear of any pileups, we'll, sort of in the text, just indicate snow squall. It's a little bit, it's not perfect at this point, but that's sort of the goal right now, is to try to verify that thing and push things ahead. But yeah, it's going to be some ground truth when we have it. But undoubtedly, the observation sensors are not great. In fact, the March 28th pileup, there was an RWIS about a mile away, and it was as if nothing ever happened there because the snow squall didn't go over that location. So some nuance, but ideally, we would not verify any of these warnings in that there wouldn't be any pileups, but that's probably fairly unrealistic at this point.
But you have a warning that you need to verify, right? You need to verify. And it's the same thing Paul's talking about. We're talking about in the chat. Paul, you said with the dust, it's a quarter mile or less?
Right. So probably with a squall, I don't know, the snow squalls maybe have visibility component as well.
Yep,
And my office
it's a
doesn't
quarter.
issue them. So.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So, we by dusk or morning had observation of that quarter mile or less. So it's not necessarily hit if something bad happens, right? I mean, it's just like John said. I mean, if the warning does its job, then you shouldn't have negative outcomes.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing too, I think that differentiates snow squalls, and one thing we've been trying to say is like the flash freeze is the critical piece, because all the time snow showers produce visibility less than a quarter of a mile. That's not necessarily bad because you can probably still stop. And so the complexity becomes, was it or was it not? And there's been a lot of concern about overwarning and people turning things off, as with every other warning that the Weather Service issues. So it's again, very nuanced. We're trying to understand a little more social science stuff, working with Joe Rittberger down at OU to kind of get some snow squall questions in their annual surveys to try to build in that piece. Very unexplored, probably one of the least explored aspects of the Weather Service at this point, and something that's really fun to sort of feel like we're on the cutting edge, even though it's a small geographic area. Feels pretty significant, the work that we've been trying to do to get the word out and hopefully mitigate the concerns with this hazard moving forward.
Well, John, we kept you way longer than we should have, but it's a fascinating conversation. We're going to have you back on January 23rd. We've got 3 Pennsylvania-centered shows in January. Jerry Tracy, who's a Penn State guy, on the 9th. He's retiring in Birmingham. Jen's going to have her alumni show on the 16th. And then you on the 23rd. Now, of course, you went to Ohio State. John, any digs you want to get in there about college football after this crazy weekend?
See, I went over to Penn State today to give a weather briefing, and I've been known to wear Ohio State stuff walking into Walker Building, the Penn State Meteorology Building, and they said, you didn't wear anything. And I said, well, I think 5 wins in a row speaks for itself in the college football. So,
Wow.
I grew up in Columbus. I was in the band for 5 years at Ohio State. My wife's a Penn Stater. Our daughter has a half Ohio State, half Penn State onesie that my mom made. So it's all in good fun. And Michigan is the primary concern as an Ohio State guy. So that's where I pull no punches, even though my mom went to Michigan. So lots of fun.
That stayed up north, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I have to be able to say it. You were a part of the best damn band in the land.
That is right. Yeah, what a great experience. I could talk for hours about that as well. It was a whole lot of fun, but man, it's been a good life. I've been very blessed, that's for sure.
We've enjoyed having you. Please come back and join us.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, John.
And any other time you get a chance. Thanks, John.
Right. Thanks,
Paul. Thank you so much for helping us stay classy tonight. We need some help. I think the peanut gallery over here has sort of evolved into something.
This week,
we have devolved into something that, as Jen said, she takes her eyes off chat for 2 seconds and look what happens. But that's right. So Paul, tell us how you got interested in weather. That's always interesting to us.
I think my weather story is pretty boring, unfortunately. I just was going through school. I think most students go in like 8th grade, earth science kind of class, and weather just kind of interested me, and I just kept pursuing it. So I was going through high school and felt like I wanted to do. It didn't seem really any questions. So I visited different schools and ultimately settled on going to St. Cloud State University, which is up in Minnesota. That's my home state. So I got my degree there and then just got my own. So here I am many years later doing weather.
So you started out in what, 30 below zero? And James is pointing out there's a little bit of a Bluetooth issue, maybe, Paul, with your sound. So it
sounds like a Bluetooth thing, Paul. Just so, people that listen, and most people listen, they get real mad when the audio is not clean, but it almost sounds like it's a Bluetooth connection on the fringe or something. I don't know if you can go to a different mic or something, but I don't want our. And people get mad. They get mad at me, so they won't get mad at you. They get mad at me. But you might want to check, see if you can kind of clean the audio slightly before we get too far into the show, because this is good stuff.
This is a different microphone. Is that working better?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, as James said, the technical term is boogered up. That's a real sound term right there. But
it's also a good show title.
Yeah, it is. So, Paul, you went from 30 below in Minnesota to what, 120 in Phoenix?
Yeah, 120 is the hottest I've experienced here so far. So
what is the all-time record high there in Phoenix?
122, and that was back in 1990. So it's we hit 100. Our high this year was 115. So most years we do get somewhere, 115, 119. It's really gets pretty hard for us to start getting more to that 120. We've only hit, I think, 120, 121, and 122 individually. So it's still hard for us to hit those super high numbers, but we routinely will hit 110. I think the average is something about 10 or 15 days a year we'll have 110 or higher.
And we had a record high here. James, how hot did it get in Birmingham today? I know we made it to 84.
85. The 85 was the high. Tuscaloosa did 88.
Woo.
So pretty toasty for November.
Hey,
You guys
Paul,
are actually
that
doing.
will tie
you guys
our
are doing-
second hottest November day.
You guys are hotter than us. It was only 79 here in Phoenix today.
Yeah.
Paul, when it's 110, what are your dew points, Ron?
It will depend, of course, on the time of year, but it might be in the 40s to low 50s. But a lot of people kind of have that misconception, I would say, that it's always a dry heat. I mean, we have the monsoon in the Southwest. So we will routinely have a lot of dew points in the 60s, even into the 70s. And if you go further west from us, still in my forecast area, actually go into the Imperial Valley in Southeast California, that's probably got to be one of the most miserable places to live during the summertime, because they routinely, you look at that ASOS out there, it'll be 112 over 70 or something like that. It's just really, really hot, impressive weather there.
Oh my goodness. So heat's an obvious thing, and we've talked about the haboobs. What else? What are some of the other research activities that you're involved as a Sioux there in Phoenix, Paul?
So, I mean, heat obviously is the big focus, because that kills and injures far more people than any of the other weather activities combined. And then other aspects, flash flooding, of course, is a big thing here in the Southwest. There are some years where the Phoenix office has actually issued the most flash flood warnings of any office in the country. So this is something we look at and study and try to improve our abilities to issue those warnings quite extensively. The dust we mentioned as well. So those are probably our big three that we would look at every year.
Paul, I've got a question for you. I mean, that summer monsoon season, that's interesting down there. And I remember, Bill, when was this? NWA meeting, was it in Tucson? Tucson,
yeah,
when the roof of the hotel blew off that night. Remember the severe thunderstorm? It was in September, and I just remember it hailed, and I've never seen anything like that. And it was right in the middle of the monsoon.
I was out at dinner with Ken Graham that night. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen a more excited group of meteorologists, but no, they had brought flash flooding to the desert.
I mean, everyone thinks it's like boring weather out here, but once we get into July and August and early September, I mean, what do you think happens when you inject some moisture into these temperatures of 110, 115 degrees? I mean, it's tons of energy in the atmosphere here, so you can get these humongous storms that'll develop. And I mean, I've seen measured rainfall rates on the order of like 10 to 12 inches an hour. So I mean, it can get really intense rainfall.
And talk about the urban heat island, because that's a critical component of it. I know when you can't cool off at night, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, every place has a heat island to some effect, whether it's a little town of 500 people or a big metro area like Phoenix of 4 or 5 million people. So just all the changing of the environment, and you have all that, the concrete, the buildings, the house, the steel, all that stuff retains that heat. The specific heat of the material is going to be a lot higher. So when the sun goes down and the air starts cooling very rapidly, but the buildings retain that energy and really hold on to it overnight. And we've seen that in our low temperature records over time has had a tremendous impact. The low temperatures are increasing at about twice the rate that the high temperatures are increasing. So the high temperatures are increasing about 0.3 degrees per decade, I believe. Here the low temperatures are going up 0.6 degrees per decade. And so that manifests itself in a lot of nights during the summer where it doesn't cool below 85 or 90 degrees. Our all-time warmest low temperature in Phoenix is 96 degrees. And I think it's just a matter of time before we see a low of 100 degrees. I'm fully certain it's going to happen at some point.
Oh my goodness, that gives me pause just thinking about it right there. Your thesis was on the effect of urban heat islands and rainfall, and that's an interesting topic too, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's been studied for better part of a century, looking at how cities impact the rainfall either through the pollutants or the heat that comes from it, and very obvious discernible signal from it. It's kind of a little bit of a difference here. You kind of think about, and I don't think it matters where I've lived. Everyone seems to think there's a bubble around the city they live at. I think it's more that people just are hyper focused on a single point. If you picked a random location, in a cornfield or out in the desert and intensely watched it the same way, I think you would also be disappointed that the storms are constantly going around you. But that said, there certainly is a lot of research to support that storms actually, or cities actually can enhance the rainfall and the thunderstorm activity. And under certain conditions here in Phoenix, we do see that, but we also can see where the city will actually suppress the rainfall activity as well. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but something certainly think about. And you just start thinking about, again, like how many people get impacted by this. Phoenix is a huge city. It's something, if you drove east to west, it's about 80 miles. If you go north to south, it's like 40 miles, so this is a huge area, and it's probably only once or twice this summer do we actually get enough thunderstorm activity that the entire metro area will get hit by rain. So it's almost always going to be some mix with these days during the summer.
Hey, Paul, if I remember right, Phoenix has some fairly unique heat mitigation things that are codified by the city, like air conditioner capacity. You have to be able to, if I'm trying to remember, because I wrote about this in a paper 4 years ago, so a few more papers have gone by since then. But the air conditioning capacities for landlords with tenants, I mean, you can imagine some of the issues there. And it seems like as well, they have, it's codified that residential trash cans have to be covered to keep them from getting too hot and possible spontaneous ignition in trash.
I haven't heard that one, but I do know my trash can's black and it's sitting out in the sun all day, so I can only I don't want to know what that smells like in July. I do my best to avoid that. But your comments about having air conditioning, that is something. I don't know if it's I don't remember if it's at the city or the state level. I think it's the state level, but you're right, as a tenant is to cooling essentially, but it's that the temperature has to be 85 degrees or less. So I mean, that is pretty high, but when you're thinking about temperatures are outside or 100, 110, that is some pretty significant cooling that takes place. But I mean, that does kind of dovetail a little bit too. I would talk about, other impacts, not just people getting sick and dying from the heat, which, I think people may underestimate. I would touch on that a little bit, but there's also the, huge economic costs as well. I mean, think about what your air conditioner does going through the summertime if it basically never gets below 80 degrees during July and August. I mean, your air conditioner is running nonstop. 3 in the morning, it's still running because it's 90 degrees outside. So you get some pretty big electric bills. And unfortunately, some people have to deal with that and decide, do I have enough to run air conditioning? What am I setting my thermostat at? Do I have to set it at 88 so that my electric bill is only $250 this month and not $400? So a lot of impacts that happen.
You've raised the issue right there of one of the vulnerable populations or those with fewer resources. A lot of people choose to live there because of different things, the work or the climate, the other months of the year. But some people don't have the same resources. And what are some of the other at-risk populations that you're trying to protect, Paul?
Yeah, so you see the data and like as far as the deaths and which populations, which communities are bearing the brunt of that. I mean, it's very much the homeless population and then the elderly folks. So I'm just curious. I ask you guys, the panel, I'll ask the peanut gallery here. How many deaths do you think happened were heat associated, heat related in Maricopa County last year? So in 2021. So that's basically the entire Phoenix area. So how many heat associated, heat related deaths happened last year?
I would guess lower than big cities in the Northeast or Midwest.
I need a number though.
I'll guess 25.
Without going over.
Okay.
10.
Price is right rules.
Yeah.
14, 14,
I was
14,
gonna guess
14.
Like 50, but I'm going way higher than everybody else.
Okay, so the actual answer is 339. So you guys are off by
Kim's the winner. Kim's the winner.
You guys made me
Kim, you
adjust
won.
down. I was thinking it was in the order of hundreds, but you guys are like 5, and I was like, oh.
Well, there's probably some element of undercounting, Paul. Is that number undercounting, or is that sort of normalized for true?
I don't think the numbers undercounted here. I think Phoenix actually does a very excellent job of looking at these numbers because they've been training their coroners, and the county and the state health department have been very aware of this now for almost 20 years, that they've actually done really good counting, I would say. I would probably challenge that most other parts of the country have severe undercounts that are happening.
Yep.
Like if you look at the data that come from my agency, you know, like storm data, things like that, it says that on the order of, I think, 50 or 100 people die from heat every year, which is obviously wrong because, you know, Phoenix even has more than that. So we've been trying to put more data into storm data to try to get those numbers up. But, you know, CDC estimates, research they've done says that about 700 people across the country die every year from heat. And that's probably even a bit of an undercount too. And then we look at the injuries, you know, we have a nice partnership with the county health department, and they give us daily counts on emergency room visits due to heat illness. And those numbers basically each year add up to about 2,000 to 3,000 people that go to the emergency room just for heat. So, I mean, there's tremendous impacts that happen here on our health side and then on the economic side too.
Now, Paul, you're one of the developers of the Heat Risk Project, which caught my attention at NWA. Talk about that program, what it is and how it works.
So we have partnered with the CDC in our latest version in our research, and we've developed this framework based on climatology and the CDC data that has these different thresholds and these different levels for the entire country. Actually, we've developed it, and we can compare the forecasts against these thresholds, and then it comes up with a color-coded system, basically. So pretty similar to, you know, like an air quality index that a lot of people might be familiar with. And so based on these different thresholds, if you're in a population that is very susceptible to heat. So like we're talking about maybe folks that are on fixed incomes and they're really concerned about cost cooling their homes. If you're working with homeless population, or you are homeless yourself, you know, you probably should be paying attention to these low thresholds. And then as you go up to the medium, moderate, high, and then very high, that we would anticipate the impacts increasing to broader and broader aspects of the community. So we built this heat risk where it essentially localized to every location. So it's based on the same gridded data that our NWS forecasts are. So it's a 2.5 kilometer grid across the entire country. So we have all these thresholds for basically everywhere across the US. The way the CDC data comes in is that, you know, we came to them with our weather information. They came to us with the heat impact data. And so we tailored this essentially to where the low threshold is at that first percentile. Basically, where do you start to get the most severe outcomes from heat? You know, deaths are happening. And so that's where that low threshold is set at. And then we get up all the way to the high category is kind of tied to the 50th percentile. So it's really nice that we're, you know, ingesting and putting in this impact data with the weather information. And, you know, honestly, probably those temperatures, the low impacts happen, is probably going to be a lot cooler than what you guys think. So I know James is on here with Huntsville. The threshold for the low category in Huntsville is 78 degrees. So based on the CDC data, that's when you can start to expect any deaths might occur just with high temperatures in the upper 70s. For Phoenix, it's 85 degrees. And we've been sitting here talking about temperatures much hotter than that. So, you know, people that have much greater exposure or much greater vulnerability certainly feel these impacts at a lot lower thresholds than folks like myself that have ability to mitigate the impacts from it, because I live in a house with air conditioning that I can afford.
And I'm excited to see Dr. Neil Jacobs just joined us. I think he's in New Orleans at a fancy hotel. Dr. Jacobs, welcome to the show. Glad you could make it.
I am down in New Orleans at a fancy casino hotel. Already drawn the ire of security once for looking like I'm counting cards, but of course I don't do that.
No. Well, we're glad you're here. We're of course talking to Paul Iniguez. I'm sure I butchered it again. Please say it right for me, Paul, so I can at least get it right once before the night's over.
Iniguez.
All right. And I know Neil Jacobs already knew that, but we're talking heat and all things Phoenix and in the Southwest right now, Neil, just to catch you up. And we're glad you're here with us. And I see that pronunciation help right there. That's wonderful. I really appreciate that. So how are your partners using this? How are you messaging this, Paul?
So we have been working with our partners. We do use the heat risk in the western region of the National Weather Service. It is one of our primary inputs for the local offices to determine when and where to issue the excessive heat watches and warnings. So it's kind of a complementary system. We locally here, we've been working with our partners pretty extensively. The state health department has adopted it. The county health department is gravitated towards pretty extensively. We're seeing it start to creep into some hazard mitigation plans as well, because people are really seeing the utility of it. We are planning to go national with this next year. So there's been green lit to be I forget if it's experimental or prototype or what the bureaucratic label is for it, but we are anticipating that this information will be going national next year so people can start evaluating it across more of the US. We have done our due diligence, we've done verification with it with other data sets, and we do see that it works really well, across the entire country, that as these heat risk levels go up, you do see more and more impacts.
So Paul, what's the end product that ends up in the NDFD in the grids? Is it the scale 0 to 4 or is it a threshold, or what is it?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll end up in NDFD, like I'll just say that now, if eventually, I know there's some other, obviously we have other heat data that's available. There's the heat index, which everyone's been using for decades. There's the web hub globe temperature that went operational within the past few years. The gridded data I would anticipate it would go out would be just an array of integers, essentially 0 to 4 for each forecast day.
All right, that makes sense. And how are you transitioning from the legacy products? What challenges does that cause? And what are your partners doing about that?
That's there's still a lot of folks that lean on having those legacy products, the warnings, and so they still do serve their purpose. We issue them, and they're very high visibility products. The challenge, I think, is working with partners, especially ones that are interacting with more vulnerable populations, and trying to get them to use something like heat risk and understand that you shouldn't just be waiting for the heat warnings to come out, because those are the hottest of the hot days, or those are the broadest impacts. If you're working with the folks who are homeless, if you're working with the outdoor population, their vulnerability is going to be a lot lower. So you should really be paying attention more on these days where it's even low or moderate. It shouldn't be just waiting on those high days. So it's just like with everything we do in the weather community, that the challenge is on the messaging and trying to get the right information to the right people at the right time.
Let me I hate to just like drop in mid interview and then ask a completely off topic, irrelevant question that's probably been covered, but what is the sort of the aspect of air quality? Does that factor into this, or are you, maybe you've already discussed this. I remember flying into Phoenix a couple of different times and just seeing this massive haze because of the heat and the inversion. And how does that factor into some of this?
The heat quality, the air quality aspect, you're saying?
Yeah. There seems to be a pretty strong correlation to these, I don't know whether they call them like high ozone days or whatever, but it really seems like there's a correlation between the air quality issues as well as the heat.
Yeah, I think at most places when the heat really starts to build up and just the chemical reactions that are happening in the atmosphere, that you'll start to get those ozone alerts that our air quality partners might be putting out. So it's not something we necessarily built into the heat risk product, but it certainly would be an interesting aspect that we could be anticipating more of those air quality issues especially on the very high days.
Are you doing anything, completely second unrelated question, are you doing anything with like drones, quadcopters, like really low level thermodynamic profiles far as?
We are not. I would love it if folks were doing that out there. It seems like a smart way to do soundings in the boundary layer, but we do leverage ACARS soundings pretty extensively. We have a huge airport that happens to be unusually located right in the middle of the city, so we do get a lot of good data from there to look at.
Interesting. Yeah, that's there's not a lot of places I think that have access to the ACARS data. And I think that, I don't know if all the ACARS, a lot of them don't have the dew point profiles. It seems like it's just temperature and wind.
Yeah,
What
I
would
think,
what would you use like in other areas? Like, I mean, you're right. That's a massive airport there. They've got a lot of throughput, but in other places they don't have that kind of coverage.
yeah, I mean, the big airports, probably the top 30 or so, are going to have a lot of them. I believe mostly Southwest Airlines does have a lot of their planes do have the dew point sensor on there as well. So, you know, we get a ton of Southwest flights into Phoenix, so that kind of helps out with us. So, I mean, this is like a challenge for any meteorologist, you know, with the remote sensing, is that we just don't have a lot of those observations out there, just the ACARs to complement the 70 or so upper air stations that are spread out across the US.
They actually here in Austin during the thunderstorms last Friday, for what Paul said, because Southwest, and I think it's Paul FedEx, on their 2 aircraft, they do have it. And I know here in Austin last Friday, we used them extensively. Weather Service used those ACARs here at Austin Bergstrom International Airport around the thunderstorm activity.
Yeah, I gotta give a big shout out to the WVSS2 program, and I guess it used to be Spectra Sensor. I don't know who owns the IP now, but it's a FedEx, Southwest, UPS. A lot of the nighttime carriers have them, and some of the regional jets have something similar called TAMDAR. Yeah, that's cool information. Sorry to just completely take us in a different direction. I'll stop.
You always take us in great directions,
Yeah.
Dr. Jacobs.
I'm
A,
down here in New Orleans at the Noesio convention, and we've been having a lot of awesome, interesting conversations. So I have been talking forecasting all day. I just ran up to my room. I'm going to go back down wearing some different outfits and try to fool the security into letting me play blackjack some more.
Count cards more. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, we're so glad you made it in. Can you stay a little bit longer, or you need to go?
I got probably 5 minutes.
All right, good. Well, we'll keep moving along here. James A., what did you have for Paul?
Paul, have you thought about somehow incorporating acclimation factors into this, especially for other part of the countries?
We do have it built in a bit into the heat risk framework. So especially it takes place in our thresholds for the moderate level. The moderate level in the springtime is going to be lower than what the moderate threshold is in the fall. And then also the rate at which these thresholds kind of increase to go along with the warming climate as you head into the peak of the summer. And that threshold is going to increase more rapidly in the spring, and then it's going to tail off a little bit slower in the fall. So that's where we do try to take into account that acclimatization factor.
I think Kim's looking for her mute button. Maybe Kim, it's your turn.
Yep, thanks. I am really intrigued by what you said earlier about your impacts forecasting verifying. This is something that, of course, is a concern in the Weather Service. Generally, we want to move from forecasting for hazards to forecasting for impacts. And this is what you're developing. This is one of the first prototypes out there. There are other prototypes that are in existence for other hazards. They have faced some significant challenges in getting verification data. What can you tell us about the particular hazard that you're working in and what has made it successful, this endeavor to make a scale that's impacts based and to have some correspondence to verification data?
Yeah, is screen sharing allowed? Can I do that? I can show some data on here if you guys want to.
It can be arranged.
I could have it enabled.
We can make that happen, and it's good to go now.
All right. So hopefully here you should see one chart. I just actually updated this earlier this week. So this is what I mentioned earlier, the working with the county health department. They give us this syndromic data. So the number of people that are going to the emergency room due to heat. So you can see just looking day by day, and then the color coding based on what the observed heat risk value for Phoenix was that day. And then the little stars are where we've issued heat warnings. So you can see that the heat warnings are corresponding with the bigger spikes in the impacts. And so I should mention, this is totally separate data. This is not the CDC data we use to generate heat risk. This is, from a separate entity. And so this is a different verification type of data we're looking at. But there is this nice correspondence. And if you average it out, that's the chart you see in the top left. there's a very clear stepwise increase that as the heat risk category increases, you're seeing an increasing number of impacts. So that's one data set that we've had locally that we've been able to work with. Another one here is looking at the city of Phoenix and the phone calls they get into the fire department for heat illness or for heat assistance. And you see pretty much the same exact thing. The impacts really increase on these days that are going to be high, mostly high and very high, but there's still impacts that happen on basically every day that you can see on these charts. So even on the low or moderate days, you still are going to have impacts that occur. And then looking at some of the other CDC data kind of impacts. So this is the heat risk webpage itself. And we did just add this here, this verification tab. And there's a pretty nice big chart here. And I think if I click this, it'll open it. And so we've looked at this is again looking at kind of like emergency department visits. And this is data from CDC injuries and looking at the different HHS or FEMA regions. And if you kind of average that and compare that to the average heat risk category, there's some really high correlations that are happening here across basically every single region. So, we're seeing in a lot of this different impact data that the heat risk works. It's matching up as the levels increase, you're seeing those impacts increasing. It's not just for the Southwest or the West. It works in basically the entire country.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And there's a little bit of comment in chat about this question of timing and how that plays into it. I think one of the things that you maybe have going for you in being able to construct something like this is that the impacts should be fairly stable in time. So in these particular places, once you hit a particular threshold, there are populations that will just be exposed in some way and are therefore vulnerable, and that you'll get these kinds of impacts. For other hazards, there may be more complications, more nonlinearities that make it a little bit tough to do this. But can you speak to, do we see the same thing for maybe the first big heat event of a week or a year, a season, as subsequent ones? Does that weigh into this? And how does that tend to affect verification?
I'll show, this is another heat risk page that anyone can grab. I mean, if you see the URL here, but I pulled up what these thresholds look like for Huntsville, so you guys can get an idea of what we're looking at as far as temperatures exceeding them. So there is, you're kind of talking about the first event. Does it kind of, and I believe this is the term that they use in the health literature, unfortunately it's like harvesting. So there are people that perhaps are going to be more susceptible to heat as you go into a heat season, and that first big heat event, they're going to really feel that impact. So those negative outcomes might be realized early on, and then as you go through subsequent events, you've kind of taken out the most vulnerable, so they kind of drop off. I haven't personally worked on that myself, just looking at this different impact data, but it is something that is discussed in the the medical peer review journal arena. So I would kind of wait to see it, if that is something that we tease out of our other impact data. But this is pretty unique, because a lot of the things that we work with in the weather world, we don't really get a lot of impact data, and we're seeing, or kind of more holistic data like this. So it's really interesting to see that it's bearing out.
James A., you had a comment. Then Neil, you had an important comment. If Neil's still here,
I was looking at that map that you had up earlier, and it looked like there was a big bullseye in north central Texas and southern Oklahoma. And along those lines, are we seeing in these heat-related injury visits, are these people that have been outside overexerting? What's the correlation with the activity involved that the victim was in? Or maybe they were inside and no air conditioning.
So the map here that you're looking at, so this is just an example of heat risk for a single day. So this was actually the most impactful day from this summer across the entire country. So you had the highest rate. So this was July 20th. So this was, obviously there was a big heat event going on across the South Central US, across Texas. And as far as what are the circumstances for folks when they are getting impacted, injured by this heat, I don't know. And it's something I have to go through with our health partners at CDC, if they have that kind of information, because I'm sure we can all imagine that there's just tons of different circumstances that go on with how people are injured, what's going on in those situations. It's just not different from anything else, right? Like flash flood fatalities, there's all sorts of circumstances that go on there, tornado fatalities. So I'm just trying to learn what what those are and the subtleties of them are, of course, really challenging.
This is an impressive amount of work, and I think I probably was running through my mind some of the same things that were just asked. Like, I think that there's probably some socioeconomic variables in here along with other things, and it would be interesting to see how those could sort of get teased out to refine the forecasting. Has this been written up anywhere, published at all? Or?
It has not yet. That's kind of a winter goal. Hopefully we can realize this goal, because it's obviously at this point it really needs to get a paper behind it. We've been developing it for, I would say, almost 10 years at this point. So I think the version we're at now is really getting to a pretty good stable part. We've done tons of presentations on it. So like Bill mentioned, or that you saw this at NWA. So we've been presenting at NWA off and on over the past few years. I'll have an AMS presentation coming up here in Denver in January on this as well. But yeah, it certainly is on our to-do list for this off season to get it written up.
I think this would make an awesome paper in BAMS, and I think getting some visibility out there, and then the CDC. It's interesting. I feel like it was just on when the pandemic happened that the CDC realized maybe there's a Weather Service NOAA sort of interaction here where we could work together. And this actually seems like a much more relevant area to play in. So this is awesome. Congratulations. I can't wait to see it published.
Thanks.
All right. So what we're going to do here is take a quick break, and that Bill Murray, be sure I'm doing the right page here. We're going to take a break for the recorded segments. Okay. So let's do that right now.
Stick around, Paul. We've got a couple of interesting guests that we want to talk about, about Hurricane Ian. And I still want to hear some more thoughts from you on how the public's, receive our messaging. I know that's a key thing that you like focus on. And that's one thing we're going to be talking about in just a minute.
All right, so we will take a quick break here for Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We're going to have Jen's This Week in Tornado History. We'll come back with segment number 3, Picks of the Week, and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
This week begins with hurricane watches as newly named subtropical storm Nicole is forecasted to impact the east coast of Florida. NASA is keeping a close eye on this one, as it could yet again affect the next launch attempt on November 14th of the Artemis 1 mission to the moon. The 32-story SLS rocket was rolled out to the launch pad early Friday morning after it had been rolled back to the vehicle assembly building in late September to ride out Hurricane Ian. Rollback isn't expected this time ahead of Nicole, at least for right now. According to U.S. Space Force Launch Weather Officer Mark Berger, sustained winds of 25 to 30 miles an hour and gusts approaching 45 are what's expected at the Cape. And that's well within the constraints for the rocket sitting on the launch pad, which was designed to withstand up to 85 mile an hour wind gust. The National Hurricane Center, as of this morning, was putting a less than 1 in 20 chance of sustained winds approaching those damaging levels. But if things change and NASA does decide to roll the rocket back, it'll happen well ahead of forecasted landfall. You see, it takes 6 to 12 hours to complete the 4-mile journey back to the vehicle assembly building. And that trip is limited to no more than 46 mile an hour peak winds. And there's other weather criteria that must be met before a rollback would be attempted. Less than 10% chance of lightning within 20 nautical miles, and no more than 5% chance of hail. Looking ahead to November 14th, the wind criteria is a bit less forgiving. Winds can't exceed 44 miles an hour at 450 feet above the launch pad. That instrumentation is mounted on the 600-foot tall towers that surround the launch pad and make up the lightning protection system. That's your Astronomy Outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, the Veterans Day weekend tornado outbreak occurred November 9th through the 11th, 2002. For the NOAA service assessment of this major event, 76 tornadoes were produced across 17 states. There was a total of 36 fatalities. For the NOAA assessment, the Veterans Day weekend tornado outbreak covered a very large area of the eastern United States and can be described as 4 distinct areas or episodes of tornadic activity. The fatalities associated with the event occurred over a 25-hour period. The first episode began the evening of Saturday, November 9th, and into the early morning of Sunday, November 10th. 10 tornadoes developed within a cluster of supercells, and 7 of the 10 occurred in the state of Tennessee, 2 of which caused fatalities. One of the tornadoes was rated F2 and moved through parts of Carroll County, Tennessee. It developed near the town of Terry and moved to the northeast. A mobile home park was hit near Leach, and this is where 2 people were killed. They were Annette Forsyth, age 65, and her son Neil, age 42. They lived in a double-wide mobile home. Her 2 other children, Ricky and Darlene, were injured. 3 other homes, 2 businesses, and a farm building were destroyed, and 40 other homes and buildings were damaged. Read about this event at tornadotalk.com.
We have a couple of very special guests tonight. One who has an incredible story, and one who picked up on my comment after the Hurricane Ian show and did something about it. First, we appreciate all of our incredible listeners. Our community is amazing. And I especially appreciate them when they help out the guest booking officer. But the Washington Post wrote a story that I read after Hurricane Ian, and I mentioned on the show about a couple who was honeymooning at the Lovers Key Resort in Fort Myers Beach. Now, I thought it said Lowe's, and my apologies to Jonathan Tish, because I thought Jonathan Tish would have never allowed this to happen to his guests at Lowe's hotels. But anyway, I learned that this couple, were left at the hotel after it was evacuated. The staff, didn't, other than a note, tell them that, they needed to go. But listener Rusty Griffin reached out after I mentioned it on show 873. Rusty, wanted to thank you for doing that. And I wanted to have you here tonight because you've got an incredible story too. But thank you for, what you do. You were inspired to get into what you do now by a very important figure in our field. Who was that?
That's right. Dr. Neil Frank was my childhood meteorologist as I was growing up on KHOU. I remember I would spend many weekends at my grandma's house, and that was the absolute every single evening, and then even during the week at home. But he was like just everything. Like, I mean, I relied on everything he did. I even remember had a MySpace page that featured Dr. Frank back when MySpace was around. So no, he was very influential and was always listen to what he had to say.
MySpace, that brings back memories. We were talking earlier tonight about, I was really dating myself with the 1974 Atlanta Braves and the Christmas show Year Without a Santa Claus. So, not many folks on this show can remember that far back. But thank you for your loyal listenership and being here tonight. But in this Washington Post article, there's this picture of a couple rolling their luggage down, an empty highway with the big high-rise hotels in the background and all this debris across the road. And I was reminded of Steve Martin in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, except that it wasn't funny. It was striking, and it's so resonant because that could be any of our hospitality guests in any evacuation zone during a hurricane. But here to tell their story tonight is one of those 2 people in the picture, Justin Smith. Congratulations to you and your bride on your recent nuptials, but I assume you're still married after this experience. I assume that's okay.
Yes, we are very happily married.
That's fantastic. Well, Justin, you're no stranger to hurricanes. And I think you're in Southeast Texas, not your first rodeo. So talk about other storms you've experienced in the past.
So I work in downtown Houston, and I was actually stuck in downtown during Harvey. Now, the building that I was in was not flooded, but I couldn't go anywhere. I was actually stuck at work for 5 nights. I slept on my desk.
And that was a well forecast storm. Did you have the information that was coming out by that Friday that predicted the biblical rainfall amounts?
Yes, I did. I work for a bread producer, and we were trying to shut down, and we had a machine go down because the first thing that everybody wants, from a hurricane is bread. So we were trying to get out as much as we could get out, and we had a machine go down, and I'm the engineering superintendent. So I went down to try to figure out the problem. By the time that I got done with it, it was too late for me to get out of there.
So now take us back to Tuesday, September 27th. one day before landfall. What was the messaging you were hearing, and what was your thought process at that point?
Now on Tuesday, I didn't have a rental car there, so I couldn't just leave. Now, by the time that we, because it was raining all day Tuesday, just, normal rain. So the rain let up. So me and my wife decided to go down and go get some fresh air and walk around outside. We go downstairs and everybody in the lobby is gone. The elevators aren't working. And we go outside and the door locked behind us. And then we see a note on the door that says the building has been evacuated and the water is turned off and the elevators are turned off. So I had to jump over the fence for the pool and go in through, they had a screen door like in the pool area, and they left that door unlocked. I was able to get back into the building so that we could get back in. But as far as that's when we knew that the building had been evacuated. Now, of course, I wasn't glued to the phone, wasn't glued, to the weather station. I was on my honeymoon. And it's shame on me for not having my, phone set to that area for alerts. But, the last thing that we had saw, everything was tracking up towards Tampa. And I knew that we were going to get some rain, but it wasn't going to be anything, devastating. If it would have went to Tampa, we would have been just fine. But it was,
it's really incumbent on us as hotel people, because I'm in the hotel business also by day job, to take care of every single guest. And I hate that happened for you. I'm literally mouth agape here, and most of the panel too.
Now this was not actually a hotel. This was a condo building. It's a resort.
Still, it's kind of the same thing. And they said they got a responsibility to make sure everybody gets out. But you answered that question about renting a car, and I'd never thought about that. The ride sharing services go away.
Yes, Uber had shut down. Taxi services had been suspended. So I was there.
So thank God you were able to get in the building. That that's just unfathomable.
If I would have had to pay for it or whatever, I was going to have to bust a window to get back in. Whatever I needed to do. I was getting back in the building.
Well, but when did you realize that the eye was gonna come very close to where you were, and that the storm surge was going to be a significant problem?
So after that, we went back up to the room, and I turned on the news, and we were watching it, and I called the Coast Guard center there. We had a little book in our room with all kind of emergency contacts. So I called them, and I told them, what was going on. And I said, I know you're not coming to get me, but can you tell me anything about the building that I'm in? So he pulled me up on satellite, and he looked, and he asked me which one of the 3 buildings I was in. I told him. He said, you should be fine. He said, just don't go anything below the 3rd floor. He said, you'll be fine. So he said, that was the latest of the buildings that had been built pretty much on the island. And he said it was up to the latest codes. The building would be strong, just stay away from the windows.
Wow. So that's good. That's good information to know right there. And how did you action from that? And tell us about the experience, Justin. What did you do to shelter?
So the way that the wind was coming from, we were right there at Big Carlos Pass. And our balcony was kind of overlooking the pool on the bay side. We were not on the beach side of the island. We were on the intercoastal, side. And our room was kind of facing to the north. So all of the wind for the first 3/4 of the storm was coming from behind us. The rest of the building was taking the brunt of it. We were actually able to walk out onto our balcony, and we felt no negative pressure, no positive pressure. It was just kind of a dead air zone there. And, every so often I would, kind of go out there, take a video, 10, 15 seconds and send it out to let everybody know that we were okay. And, just kind of documenting it as we went along. Now, as the eye got a little bit north of us, the wind changed directions, and it's coming, from the west. So we decided, we went into the bedroom, and we no sooner set our stuff down in the bedroom, and I went to go back into the living room to get a set of playing cards. And as soon as I opened the bedroom door, a piece of debris come flying through the plate glass window next to the sliding glass door. And the blinds, they were the long, stringy ones that kind of hang. Well, they have metal tabs sewn into the bottom of them for weight.
Yeah.
And they were, we had a negative pressure on the room at that point. They were sucked out, and they were slapping against the sliding glass window, and it actually busted it out. So then we had a positive pressure on the room because we had so much open area. And the way that the room was designed, I was standing inside the bedroom door, and I was, holding the door, to keep it from blowing open, and I could see the wall flexing. So we already had our stuff, packed up and ready to go. And I told my wife, because the wind was kind of coming in burst, it was kind of timeable. And I told her, I said, to get ready, as soon as I tell her to go, take off running to the door and go to the staircase. Don't stop, don't look behind for me, just keep going. And we did that, and we rode out the storm in the stairwell for another about 8 hours.
And how was that experience, Paul? You look at the video from Fort Myers Beach, and it's just this crescendo of white. You can barely even see through it. What did it sound like?
At one point, we saw a refrigerator fly out into the water. I mean, it was craziness, and it was.
As James A said in our chat here, it's like a really, really bad movie.
Yes.
That you were forced to play in.
Then we found another couple in the staircase that same thing had happened to them. They were not notified as well. But why they chose to stay, I have no idea. They had a rental car, and they still chose to stay.
But I imagine the rental car was destroyed, wasn't it?
Oh yes, afterwards, yes. But I mean, beforehand, they knew, the storm was coming, and still chose
they could have left.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the part we're interested in. Obviously, your situation is one thing, being a honeymoon couple, but I know Dr. Cloco McLean, her brain is, she has a very worried look on her face right now. As we all do. What a terrifying experience. Let's chime in and ask Justin some questions. Kim, you go first.
Sure. I mean, there's so much about this that is utterly horrifying. It's not something that anybody expects to ever walk into, and then especially just to be left like that and completely unaware. I'm fascinated that other couple had a car and also didn't evacuate. You don't know apparently why they made that decision, but it's so interesting. I mean, how did you feel being in a place, just generally, even if you had a car, you're in a place that you don't know well, and you don't know what the resources are that are available. I mean, even if you'd had a car, by the time you'd found out that this was going to happen, how would you have felt about taking an alternate action? Walk us through what you think your process would have even been.
My neighbors that just built a house next to me here in Texas, they're from Fort Lauderdale, and they have a lot of friends and family around that area. So I was exploring options of having them come to get me, but I didn't want to put them in harm's way. Say they got trapped coming to get me, if they closed the bridges or anything like that, because they were doing it without any notice. They were just closing bridges.
When did you, I imagine, putting myself in this position, in your shoes, at some point, this wave of helplessness probably hit you both. When did you feel like you had some sort of control over the situation again?
After the storm surge went down, that's when, I felt, I would say, comfortable again.
I mean, what was that like to turn around and see that sign on the door and have it locked behind you?
There was a mix of emotions there. I mean, it was helplessness. I was extremely furious, and I didn't even know who to be mad at, whether it be the individual that I rented the condo from or the people that were operating the building.
Well, this raises an important point. We've talked about this recently, and probably about this event. The rental agencies, the short-term rental places, VRBO and Airbnb, really owe it to their customers to make sure they're protected. We need to investigate, how well they're doing that. But a lot of times you're talking about just private condo owners here, that maybe aren't as versed as they could be. But anyway, I didn't want to get in the way. James A., did you have anything else to add there before Kim goes? I guess Troy was next.
I was going to let Rick go. I think Rick had a comment.
No, nothing really, Justin. I'm just sitting here with my mouth open, just like everybody else. Seems like one of the key things you did, I was really fascinated by, was you thought enough to find that Coast Guard number and call and get some information. And thankfully, you got a hold of a helpful person that was able to give you some really good information about your specific location. How did you know to do that? I mean, were you aware that those emergency numbers were there? Had you been looking at that already? Or that's pretty fascinating to me.
That was one of the first things that I always do, if I'm in a situation like that, because I mean, I volunteered with the fire department, but I never went to the academy or anything. So, I mean, I am always aware of my, surroundings, and I want to know, what to do, where to go, if something like that happens. So that's the first thing I look for, if I go to a place, the emergency contacts and things of that nature.
We like people like that. That's awesome. I mean, I don't think most people do that. I know I do it because I'm a geek and, this is what I do, but that's awesome.
That's kind of the equivalent of counting seat backs when you get on a plane to the emergency exit.
Yeah.
Very smart.
Yeah.
Justin, amazing. And I wanted to throw this back at Bill because I wanted to get a feel. Okay, so we know if you rent a condo, it may be a little different, but what responsibility, Bill Murray, do the hotels in the along the Gulf Coast have in a situation like this? It's like in a classroom at the University of Texas. If something happens in my classroom, I'm expected to try to be as accountable for students as I can be and for their safety. Faculty members don't like to hear this, but faculty members are ultimately responsible for the student's safety while they're in the classroom, no matter what university you're at. I don't care what you think about that, but it is the fact. Faculty are responsible until they no longer can be. Hotels, is there a protocol, Bill, that you see in hotels in Gulf Coast areas where when the hurricane warning goes out, okay, we're going to close the facility down? It seems to me there's got to be a phone call to every one of those 212 rooms and making sure everyone is out. It
never even occurred to me, Troy, that anybody would do it any differently.
Okay.
And it's not codified anywhere that I'm aware of. There's no innkeeper's responsibility during.
But Bill, this is best practices, though, right?
Right. I'm sure it's probably could be a source of litigation someday somewhere.
Yeah. Yep.
But it never would occur to me to let my guest, all 212 of them or how many ever in the hotel, not know. And I had this exact example in 2005 as Hurricane Dennis was coming. That storm went very quickly to a Category 4, and there was even some thought it might go Category 5. And we kept a hotel in Baldwin County, Alabama open. It was full of CNN and the Weather Channel, and Mark Sudduth was there. And we were just thinking we were going to get by. And then I realized on Saturday, 24 hours before landfall, we were making a foolish decision. And so we immediately started at 11 a.m. evacuating the hotel, contacting each guest, because you can't just throw them out 3 hours before the storm arrives. Because Justin, just said, no, there's no ride sharing. It's unsafe. The roads, the tropical storm force winds. You got to give them plenty of time before you make that decision. So it never even occurred to me that any kind of hotelier would let that happen. And I hope there's, but you sell the same things with nursing homes and Katrina and things like that, and those horrifying experiences, because sometimes if it's just left to the employees, they get scared too.
Well,
they're petrified.
But going back to Justin's story, I'll tell you now, this does not relieve the liability on condo buildings. I'm telling you now, there's no way in heck that would stand up at all. That if you're going to close a building down, I don't care if it is a transient population in a sense, Justin, that right. People have rented the other way, but you don't shut that building down till I know everyone is out of that building and safe. It just seems like, but.
And you have to pass that message, not just in the lobby. You've got to call, message lights, knocking on doors, something under every door, mimeograph sheet that everybody gets saying what's going on. We even use a program called Kipsu that lets us blast, to all the guests who, let us text them during their stay. And I used that during Hurricane Harvey, and the guests loved it, because we were giving them an hourly update. Here's what's going on. Here's what you can expect. You can't go outside or open the doors after 9 p.m. And it worked. But you're right. I knew James A. would like my mimeograph comment there. I'm dating myself constantly on this show tonight, but the information is key. Justin went to a reliable source, one I wouldn't have thought of, and got life-saving information. What floor were you on, Justin? Then I know Jen's
actually on the 4th floor.
Ooh, okay.
Ooh, you were just out of harm's way. Paul has gone. I think we've lost Paul. I want to make sure if he had anything else, he threw it in. But Jen, you had a couple questions.
Yeah, Justin, could you talk more about the surge? How high did the surge get into the condo? And then what was that like to watch the water going up and down around you?
So I'm estimating we saw about 18 feet of storm surge. And it came in very slow. But it went out very fast. But we never saw a negative surge. By 9:30 that night, the water levels were back to normal. I mean, it was really fast. Like in Houston, I guess because it has nowhere to dissipate, when the storm surge comes in, it takes a long time for that water to go back out and disappear. And it was amazing to me how fast it dissipated.
Yeah, I was struck by the outstanding video that was recorded at Fort Myers Beach. Bye, Journey. Bye, James. My kids are going out. Bye, darling. And, I was shocked at how fast it went out too, because you were back on fairly dry ground pretty quickly, well before sunset in Fort Myers Beach in that video. So what was that night like?
By 9:30 that night, the water levels were back to normal.
Wow. And how was that night? That night had to be very lonely.
So we were actually able to sleep in our bedroom. When I left out of the room, I shut the door behind me just in hopes that it wouldn't get blown open. And our bedroom did stay dry. So we were actually able to sleep in the bed that night. And the next day is when we were networking, trying to get out of there.
Well, I really don't even know what to say. I'm glad you're okay, Justin. I'm glad that you made it through this. It'll be a story to tell your kids, I tell you that.
Yeah, it's like I told my wife, we've already weathered the first storm, so we should be good.
Who else has anything for Justin? And then I want to talk to Rusty for a second. Rick Smith says, for better, for worse. We've got to start.
Yeah, we have the word.
Getting our a membership that can watch our chat, because it is unbelievable. But let's get into the response part for just a second. Rusty, you wrote a paper on the subject of people in the Houston area who had to be rescued from 3 different well-publicized, well-forecast flood events. Talk about your observations on why some people stay no matter what.
No, absolutely. And so part of my role with that fire department, I was the assistant chief of planning. So, I went into a lot of that, the vulnerability, who is at risk. And that was kind of my regular job. And then part of my degree plan after these events had happened was, writing this paper. And they were all in the floodplain. They're all in the published floodplain. These are older houses, not necessarily low income, but just, older, and they've been there a long time. And, over the series of about 16 months, we had 2 flash floods and then Hurricane Harvey. And the first one was an early morning event, so it's like, okay, maybe, it wasn't as well forecast. The second one was in the afternoon, kind of a rush hour type event. It had been forecast okay. And each time, all of our stuff is plotted out through GIS, so we know exactly where every one of our incidents are. And we had 150 rescues with each of these, combination of vehicles and houses. And then during Hurricane Harvey, we even went out kind of door to door to some of these areas, these neighborhoods, trying to communicate to these people. And a lot of them weren't really interested, and still weren't interested in hearing it. And then some would even call in on law enforcement, claiming that we were attempting to forcefully evacuate them, even though they were just trying to make sure they knew that, hey, there is a hurricane coming. It's expected to be, the worst ever as far as flooding. So make sure, you're prepared. And so after all that happened, I went back and put all that together to kind of see, if there's anything, in common with that. And we had, I want to say, more than a dozen, maybe 2 dozen. It's been about 6 years, 5 years now, I guess, since I did this, that we had to actually go to their residence and rescue them all 3 events. This is 3 times in the case of 16 months. And some of them, they would call 911. We would get there, and then they would have changed their mind, not want to leave. And then, by the time we get back, they turn around and want us to come back, So it's a very difficult thing, where we have to, make that, we want to answer every call for service, but, some of those areas, it's just difficult to get to them. There's tree canopies, so, helicopters not really an option. And even us getting in with boats and high water vehicles, it's very difficult. So it was, and that's what we found. It was a lot of the more ingrained population. I think a lot of it was that, as you're driving through some of these neighborhoods during the dry conditions, you see a lot of the large no trespassing signs. If you drive past this sign, you may not come back, stuff like that. So people that are very, very, serious about their property, their well-being. And it's like, they wanted to be there. They're worried about their property, and they wanted to be there regardless, so it's very, very difficult. And trying to put ourselves in their shoes, but on the other hand, not putting our responders at risk, having to go out there, 1, 2, 3 times, to go get these same people. It's very difficult, and something that we've worked on a lot, trying to figure out, even, since then, at the county level, of how to better message and get it to these people to where they fully understand the risk, and make sure they understand the risk, and that, some of it would happen once, it'll never happen again, then, it happens 3 times over the case of, 16 months, which is very difficult for anyone.
Yeah, Rusty, it's really interesting what you're highlighting here. I think when it comes to risk in these events, we often hear people say they want to make their own choices, like, I'll take this risk on myself, and you guys can't tell me what to do for whatever reason. You're talking about a couple of reasons people might have, but you're highlighting something really important from your perspective, from the first responder perspective. There are consequences. You're putting yourself on the line to try to rescue them when they ultimately call for help. By the time you'd gotten to that 3rd rescue, I imagine that your crew was familiar with the area, maybe even familiar with the people. Does it become harder to convince your own crew to keep doing this over and over again? And, does this change your views, maybe, or affect your views on where this individual responsibility should begin, to try to protect others when stuff like this is possible.
Yeah, no, and that's it's difficult, and we don't want to ever tell anybody no, but there were some people that it was just too risky for us to get to them, and we would make sure that you're not in the water, your house is still secure. So we're gonna let the water go down first before we actually come get you or something like that. So it was not easy.
All right, so I hate to hop in here. We've got to move along here because we're getting so late here. So Rusty and Justin, thank you guys for sharing your stories tonight. And y'all are welcome to stay for a few more minutes. We're going to wrap up here within the next 10 minutes. But we must do, before we go, picks of the week. This is where everybody shares something that is weather related. This can be a website, hardware, instruments, books, anything. And so Dr. Jacobs, who was on the show earlier, as he was leaving, he said he gets the foghorn. I think he's like Bill Murray. He likes to hear this thing. So my pick, it was an interesting article I saw. More Canadians are in the path of tornadoes, but they don't always know they're coming. And the bottom line is there's a project called the Northern Tornadoes Project that's done by the Western University. And they have found that Environment Canada has not been doing well with tornado warnings between 2019 and 2021. And they claim that 70% of tornadoes are touching down with no warning, which is a pretty bad POD if this is true. But anyway, there's an article on this. And Bill, maybe we ought to get somebody from Environment Canada on the show. Have we ever had anybody from that agency on the show?
No, I think we've had folks from the weather. What's their weather channel up there, and we've had some other Canadian meteorologists, but never anyone from the government agency. I think that would be very interesting.
Yeah, I'd love to hear their side of the story. But anyway, we'll put a link to this up on the website, weatherbrains.com. And let's see, I think Jen had to slip out. Let me see. Jen is out. She has some jet lag here. So we'll just give Jen the foghorn.
Now that's mean.
Well, no, there's no pick of the week. Got to get the foghorn. All right, Kim, give us a pick of the week. Go.
Yep, mine's quick. It's Jim Ledoux shared this really great video. He was on, I think, Lake Thunderbird here in Norman this weekend. And it's this amazing video of proactive and destructive wave interference. You can just see the wave pattern repeating, and it's mesmerizing and possibly very educational.
Very good. All right, Rick Smith, go. What's your pick of the week?
I ran across this one on Twitter over the weekend. Dr. Jeanette Sutton, who's done a lot of studies on social media and Twitter and effective messaging. Evidently, they've set up a website called the Warn Room, and they also have a Twitter account. The Twitter account will actually pull out, and they're doing some constructive critiques of warnings that come out, everything from hazmat evacuation warnings to tornado warnings and things like that. So some really interesting information there from Dr. Sutton. So that's my pick of the week.
All right, Bill, go.
Yeah, James, do you need to go, James Adelot? Because you're probably coming up on Showtime, aren't you? Are you all right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all right, good. Rick, I personally saw this radar hole there in northeast Texas and southeast Oklahoma. And I learned that the city of Durant has received a grant for a weather radar, and they've contracted with Barron to install this radar, and it's going to be installed ostensibly barring any more supply chain issues in December. And Kenneth Epler, who's the emergency manager there, is just a fabulous guy. Mm-hmm. And I had a great email conversation with him, and he's going to come back and talk to us after they get the radar in. But any comments there, Rick? Because I know we talked about one of the stations in Lake Texoma. I think there are two that kind of service that area. Yeah. One of them has a Doppler, but they won't share it, or something to that effect is what I heard. And what's going to happen with this data that the county or the city there in Durant gets? Will it be available to broadcasters, to the weather service? Will they make warning decisions on their own based on it?
Good questions. All of those. We've been working kind of in not a consulting role, but a technical advisor role since they started this whole process. And yeah, they are very, very close. It was supposed to be in September, October, November, but the supply chain issues have been an issue. You're putting a radar on a water tower on the west side of Durant, and we're so excited about it. We are confident and hopeful that we're going to have access to the data, probably through GR or something like that. As will the TV stations. Channel 12 KXII actually has their own Doppler radar they've had for years there in Medill, which is west of Durant. Channel 10, the K10 station down there doesn't have that. So we're excited about it. We're great friends with Ken, and I've been getting updates from him, and I know they've been going through training. Anyway, we're super pumped about it, and we're going to be getting together with Ken, Norman, Tulsa, actually the 4 offices that were involved in this event last Friday, Shreveport, Fort Worth, Tulsa, and Norman, to kind of work out some of the specifics about how we can access that data. But it's not going to be the perfect solution, but when we were looking at storms down there last Friday, we were about 12,000 feet is the lowest we could see in those storms. So anything will be a huge help.
Outstanding.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing all that.
All right, James A., before Eyewitness News, Action News tonight comes on, what you got for us?
I've got the Oklahoma Mesonet meteogram from Idabel, which for a while we thought was a hit by the tornado, but the Shreveport National Weather Service thinks it was rear flank downdraft from the thunderstorm. If it was a tornado, it would have been the 5th Oklahoma Mesonet site that has been hit by a tornado, including one in November of 2011, I believe. Wasn't that Tipton? I think that was a November tornado as well.
Yep. Yeah, 2 got hit in that event.
Yeah. So, and yes, we're pumped up about having access to that radar in Durant too. It really forces you to use a lot of mesoscale meteorology, storm environment meteorology when you can't see the bottom of the storm.
Awesome. All right, let's go to Troy Kimmel. Troy, what's your pick of the week? Go.
Foghorn, sir.
Oh boy, goodness gracious.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, God.
And I got to apologize to Jen. Jen sent in a pick of the week. I foghorned her, but she sent in a pick. Great set of. Yeah, that's right. I need a reverse foghorn. A great set of the photos of the Mid-Atlantic Chaser Con via Bill Hark on Facebook. So we'll put Jen's link. All right, Bill Murray, go.
Yeah, mine is a Wired article that came out. I'd never even heard of Mastodon until last Tuesday night. Now my pick of the week is an article about how to get on Mastodon.
So are you a tutor now, Bill? Instead of tweeting, do you toot?
No, I haven't adopted it yet, but I thought all of our listeners are probably running over to that platform, or maybe I'll be the last one on board. But anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. Got some great shows coming up on WeatherBrains, James. I can't remember what they all are right now. It's been a long day, but it's going to be a great ride all through the month of into January.
All right. Well, Rusty, we've stalled long enough. You got a pick for us?
I do, and it kind of goes back to what we've been talking about, and folks in outside their normal setting. Y'all probably actually may have had a show that referenced a lot of this. I'm sure Troy is really familiar with this incident. I'll have to search the archives if there is one, but it's a Texas Monthly article called "When the River Rises." It was about the flash flood event in Wimberley that swept several homes into the river and involved some fatalities from a group that was vacationing in a home where they were literally swept off. The homes were swept off the foundation with them still in them, basically woken from their sleep in some of the cases. Very tragic event that kind of goes back to that, whether it be that today's world, the Airbnb, VRBO, all these others that, even the individual homeowners, that folks outside their norm and how we communicate to those folks when there's a risk of something like this, especially with things like Flash Flood Alley and the hill country of Texas.
Awesome. And Justin, goodness, what's the one lesson that you learned from this whole experience you want people to take away from this?
Just when you're in an area that you're not familiar with, or, if you're away from home, just make sure you have your phones, set for alerts for that area. I think if I would have done that, I would have been a whole lot better off.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show this week and share your story. And glad you're okay. That was a terrifying experience. And also, Rusty, thank you. And thanks everybody here. We got to put the bow on this one. WeatherBrains is typically on the air Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central Time. Most folks watch on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. But we know that most of you listen. And we did not get an email segment in this week, but we'll do a double email segment next week. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address here, it is email@weatherbrains.com. And all of our picks of the week will be up on the show notes as well on weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. God bless.
Thank you all for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Rusty. Thank you, Justin.
Great